Catholics and the Supreme Court, Monday Musings. Since we're talking about Catholics and the Supreme Court, that obviously means we have to talk about some political figures, and it also, because tomorrow is an actual election, even though many of us have probably already voted, it's always worthwhile to mention that the Church never does endorse individual candidates for political office, and the Church never endorses political parties. So we should always make mention of that. The Church basically tries to inform the laity so that they can, in turn, with their conscience, bring those issues that are important to them as Catholics to the office, when they vote. Currently on the Supreme Court, there are actually 6 Catholics, which is surprising because Catholics only compose something like 20% of the U.S. population. And there are 2 Jews on the Supreme Court, and there's one who was raised as a Catholic but now attends an Episcopal church. So surprising that there are so many Catholics on the Supreme Court because throughout much of the history of the Supreme Court, the justices were mainly white male Protestants, and now we obviously see certainly a different makeup on the Supreme Court, and it does show the value that Catholics placed on education as a way of them getting ahead in the culture of America, and that certainly seems to have paid off in some sense because we now have 6 justices who are on the Supreme Court. Those justices are Chief Justice John Roberts, Samuel Alito, Clarence Thomas, Sonia Sotomayor, Brett Kavanaugh, and now Amy Coney Barrett. The 2 Jewish justices are Stephen Breyer and Elena Kagan, and Neil Grosh was the one who was raised Catholic and now attends the Episcopal Church. So again, the Supreme Court was established in 1789, and the first Catholic to ever be appointed to the Supreme Court was Roger Taney, and he was appointed in 1836 by then President Andrew Jackson, and it would go on to be another 58 years before another Catholic would be on the Supreme Court, and that justice was Edward White. Thurgood Marshall, he was actually the first African American to be appointed to the Supreme Court, and that was only in 1967 by then President Lyndon Johnson. Clarence Thomas is currently on the court. He was the second African American to be appointed to the Supreme Court, and he also is a Catholic. Sandra Day O'Connor was the first woman to be appointed to the Supreme Court, and that was in 1981, and then Ruth Bader Ginsburg was the second woman to be appointed to the Supreme Court. First Jewish member of the Supreme Court was Louis Brandeis. I can't even see my writing. And he was appointed in 1916 by Woodrow Wilson. And when he was appointed, there certainly was a lot of anti-Semitism that went into his appointment. So with his appointment and then all the Jews who have since followed to be on the court, we certainly see how the Jews have also gone on to have certainly a lot of influence on the Supreme Court. Sonia Sotomayor was the first woman of Latin, or first person of Latin American descent to be appointed to the Supreme Court, and she was appointed by then President Barack Obama. Of the 115 justices that have been on the court since its establishment, 110 have been men, 91 were from Protestant denominations, 15 have been Catholic, 8 have been Jews, and there's only been one who was known to have no religious affiliation. Now, the current justice that we have, who I'm sure we've all seen this on TV, Amy Coney Barrett, who has been appointed to the Supreme Court, and she was, asked to serve in that capacity by now President Donald Trump, and we'll see what happens on Election Day. Amy Coney Barrett was from a Catholic family that had 7 children, and she was the oldest in her family. Her father's actually been a permanent deacon for some 38 years, and kind of interesting, he spent a year and a half as a Jesuit novice, and he was, I guess, going to go on to become a Jesuit priest, and then he obviously discerned that calling was not for him, and so he would also go on to law school, become a lawyer, and that was where he met his wife. He had an experience with the Catholic Charismatic Renewal, which we certainly have some charismatics in this area, and because of that experience, he went on to join the People of Praise community, which has come under a lot of scrutiny because of Amy Coney Barrett's nomination, and it's basically an ecumenical covenant community. There's many of these charismatic covenant community, and Amy Coney Barrett still belongs to that community, and there are many of these communities all throughout throughout the country and even throughout the world. They're not as cult-like typically. I don't know anything about the People of Praise. They're not as cult-like as they so often get portrayed. Amy Coney Barrett, she actually has 5 biological children, and her youngest child has Down syndrome, and she has adopted 2 children. She went on, when she went to college, she went to Rhodes College in Memphis, Tennessee, and then she went on to go to Notre Dame Law School, and She got a full scholarship there, and she graduated summa cum laude in 1997. And I believe she graduated first in her class, although I'm not positive about that. And that was also where she met her husband. She would then go on to work in Washington, D.C. as a lawyer, and she actually clerked for the late Antonio Scalia, who he's now deceased. He was also a Catholic, and interesting about him is his son is actually still a Catholic priest. So just some kind of interesting things about him. And then after being in Washington, D.C. for some time, she went up back to Notre Dame to be a professor of law, and she focused on apparently federal courts, constitutional law, and statutory interpretation. Obviously, this isn't necessarily my field. And she was very well respected by the students and also her peers. And she was named Distinguished Professor of the Year by 3 graduating classes. And the Dean of the Law School said she was always one of the most popular teachers in all of the law school. She was nominated to be a judge in the U.S. Circuit, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 7th Circuit. And during that time, it was somewhat controversial because of her faith, and it was because of the controversy that surrounded it. All the full-time law professors at Notre Dame Law School actually sent a letter voicing their support for her. And obviously, I'm not involved with their law school, but I can promise they're not all certainly conservative professors at that law school. So it does show the broad, I guess, somewhat bipartisan support that she had even amongst her peers while she was teaching. Somewhat infamously, during that hearing, Senator Dianne Feinstein, who I believe is from California, said that the dogma lives loudly within you, and that is a concern. And that statement is more concerning than Amy Coney Barrett's faith, and that went on to be a popular meme. It was put on T-shirts because Catholics were obviously proud that we had someone on the court who did believe in the dogma of the Catholic Church. And then there was a lot of questioning whether someone can actually be a faithful Catholic and a responsible judge. And the New York Times would even go on, when she was going through this controversial process to the Court of Appeals, the New York Times would go on to write an article questioning things about the people of praise. So it certainly was controversial. Her juridic philosophy, from what everyone says, seems to be that of originalism, which means you interpret the Constitution, and again, this isn't my area, you interpret the Constitution according to the original meaning of the Constitution should be how we interpret the Constitution today, and that's different from those who would view the Constitution as a living document, which means that you interpret it in the light of the times we're living in. I guess it might be somewhat similar for us as Catholics if we're looking at the text of Vatican II. Some want to see it as, in continuity with the tradition of the Church, which is what I'd be inclined towards, and then some want to be guided by the spirit of Vatican II, which would then want to change the teachings of the Church because of the so-called spirit of Vatican II. Amy Coney Barrett, and when you get to the legal originalism versus living document, that's obviously not my area of expertise. I may have something I'd be inclined towards, but obviously I wouldn't know enough about it to have an educated statement on that. Amy Coney Barrett, she was nominated by President Trump, and on September 26th, when she was nominated, the president of the University of Notre Dame was actually there. His name is Father John Jenkins, and he was there to support Amy Coney Barrett in that hearing. It is important. We really do never know how a Supreme Court justice is going to rule. So even though Amy Coney Barrett is very pro-life, we never can say for sure how a Supreme Court justice is going to rule. There's been some conservative presidents who have appointed justices who they thought might be conservative, and that didn't end up happening. I have to go quickly now because we seem to be running out of time, as always. One thing Amy Coney Barrett said that was I thought very insightful is she said if, Catholics have to be questioned whether they can be a faithful Catholic because of their moral convictions, and also a responsible judge, then she also said those with no faith, because they also have moral convictions, would have to do the same. She said when she was speaking at Hillsdale College, she said, you think about the debate about whether someone's religion has any bearing on their fitness for office. It seems to me that the premise of this question is that people of faith would have a uniquely difficult time separating out their moral commitments from their obligation to apply the law. People who have no faith, people who are not religious, have deeply held moral convictions, and it's just as important for these people to set aside personal moral convictions and follow the law. So again, if we have to do that as Catholics, gotta go. Bye.